Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday. It's Monday. It's October 31st. That makes it Halloween here in the United States and, in other places around the world, too. I mean, I guess it's Halloween everywhere. It's just many, many, many millions, billions of people don't care that it's Halloween, and not some insubstantial portion of the people here don't particularly care either, but it's important to the kids, the children, and won't somebody think of the children? Of course, it is also National Giveaway Expensive Street Drugs for Free Day, apparently, as well. And everyone's worried that rainbow fentanyl, or whatever the latest scare is going to be given away for free to children, even though drug dealers are pretty into getting money for their drugs, and it's generally why they sell them in the first place. But we have very sophisticated drug dealers in this country now, willing to accept what the marketing industry refers to as loss leaders. Tremendous losses today in the markets for drug dealers who will be giving away their product for free, but hooking customers for life. And now there is a tremendous danger that children will dress up as Frankenstein every day and knock on every door in the neighborhood looking for fentanyl, and we're just not going to know what to do with them. You'll have to feed them instead, or tell them you don't have anything for them, and they'll go home to their regular lives. But I don't know. Or they'll all be dead anyway because they touched the fentanyl, which magically didn't kill you because reasons, and presumably you put on latex gloves to give out the candy, which made no one suspicious, and didn't kill you because it was super fentanyl and it kills everybody anyway, as police are dropping dead left and right by thinking about fentanyl, which is also how you declassify fentanyl, which is another issue we could get to today. But let's just all concentrate on the one thing that's going to murder us all today: giving away free drugs that kill you the minute you think about them. I'm not sure why this is happening. I note for the record that, for instance, this very factual tweet from Pat Blanchfield, who tweets as inverted vibe curve these days. Nobody's talking about this, but when dealers generously give away candy corn fentanyl to local children, those kids come back the next year as 12-foot tall skeletons. It's really effed up and super factual, and you got to look out for this stuff and make sure you're getting real news. Like, for instance, the real news that the right wing decided over the weekend that the assault on Paul Pelosi, and presumably, it sounds like from all more credible reporting, an attempted assassination on Nancy Pelosi, who was thankfully not there during the attack, that all of this is now something completely different, and they've made up an entirely different story about why the attacker was there and why Paul Pelosi was there and why the two of them ended up in the same place. And it was, in fact, some sort of sordid affair that ended in hammer fight somehow as well. And I don't know, they have a whole mythology that they've woven around it because they just felt like making things up and decided to take some advantage of it. And all the Republicans kind of, happily fell into that trap, and even if they weren't promoting the conspiracy theory, they spent the weekend saying wholly inappropriate things about this. The actual comment to make if you're a Republican and you are, in fact, politically opposed to Nancy Pelosi is, well, I heard the news of the attack, and my deepest sympathies and best wishes for a speedy recovery for Paul Pelosi. I know that must be scary. There's no room for that sort of thing anywhere in the United States or anywhere around the world. We can't resort to violence to sort out our political differences. It has to be done at the ballot box, period. End of discussion. And super moderate governor of Virginia, Glenn Youngkin, apparently couldn't manage that. His brilliant business mind would not allow him to simply leave it at that. He also had to throw in a line at one of his campaign events where he was, he was appearing for one of the congressional candidates here in Virginia, and just threw in there, by the way, anyway, we're going to send Nancy Pelosi back to her husband in California. That's what we're going to do. And, there were probably better outs for a refined gentleman of moderate taste, but that's not who Glenn Youngkin is. So lots of other crazy pot shots taken over the weekend as well. And also a rough weekend, just international news headlines of, disasters striking in various places around the world. Big Halloween-related disaster in South Korea where there was, I guess, some sort of crowd scene, and it ended up resulting in multiple, like hundreds of people trampled in the crowd. I don't know what set off the stampede exactly, but that tragedy, I'm sure, racking that country, and I don't know how that got to be that sort of situation. Apologies for having told them anything about Halloween. I don't think we're personally responsible for it or anything, but wow, that just, it's hard to imagine that happening. Meanwhile, I wake up this morning to find out that another nightmare situation, a suspension bridge in India collapsed, apparently just after its reopening, a historic of some sort bridge, 150-year-old suspension bridge, which I guess had just been refurbished apparently, but not correctly. And as part of a holiday celebration there, apparently hundreds of people packing this cable-suspended bridge over a river, and there's only a certain number of people, I guess, that can fit on a bridge like that. And the cables broke, and 150 people were killed in that disaster. It had nothing to do with Halloween. I don't know how it got to be a Halloween-related disaster in South Korea, but you keep your indigenous holidays. And although, it was an indigenous holiday actually in India that they were celebrating with this bridge. So no holidays for anybody. Everybody stay home. This didn't happen when we were all locked up for a pandemic. We had a different disaster. I don't know. It's a rough morning with some rough news. Plenty of other things to round up, though. There is also good news from Brazil, which I hope we'll also get around to, where President Bolsonaro has failed to win his next term. I don't know whether he has any plans to launch a Trump-like auto golpe and try and hold on to power, but Lula is the single-named new president, I guess, like Madonna. He's got a whole name, Luis Inácio Lula da Silva. And he was, we'll get into that later. Greg's here. I should just let Greg take us through the morning headlines because he's graciously volunteered to do that. Good morning, Greg. How are you? Happy Halloween.
Oh, thanks.
Have some fun.
And just as an aside, on a technical note, I'm watching my son's dog for the week.
Oh.
So the grand dog is here. So you may hear some dog-on-dog action in the background here.
Well, I'm not sure what to make of that. That sounds like fun.
Depending upon whether or not they decide that they're getting along or not getting along. They almost always get along.
All right. I have some fentanyl milk bones. Oh, I just died thinking about them. Sorry.
Yeah.
Never mind.
It was unbelievable. James Sarawicki on Twitter was talking about the Connecticut ads that have been going down here.
Oh, really?
And he was just astounded.
What's happening? Oh, there's some.
Well, it turns out Dick Blumenthal wants all the kids in school to be on fentanyl.
It goes with the litter
if you
boxes.
believe the ads.
Great. Okay, good. I like it too, although, again, I am
governor,
dead now.
Ned Lamont, the Democrat who's going to win re-election,
yes,
apparently wants to kill all the police officers.
With fentanyl or something else?
No, there was a wife of a police officer who was severely injured when one of the perps went after him. And for reasons that
like
are
Paul
completely
Pelosi.
Obscure, she blames Ned Lamont for it. And it's a small state. People know the story. They're all looking at this and scratching their head and saying, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah, dangerous Ned.
Right.
Well, all right.
Now the one set of ads that may work, of course, is in my district where it's George Logan versus John Hayes, very close vote. And Republicans say that John Hayes just doesn't get inflation. She's responsible for all increases in prices across the globe.
Wow.
And, it's just like one of these things. It's amazing. And, how much traction it's really going to have remains to be seen. But the amount of negative ads that are going on is pretty remarkable.
All right. Let's remark
it's
on
kind
it.
of a remarkable thing.
Well, having remarked, you're right. It definitely is remarkable. We just proved it Yeah, this the ad season is it's at its worst.
Let me give it's
What can
only
I
like
tell
3
you?
tweets, so it's really
All right.
short. But he says it's comical how full of lies the anti-Democrat ads in Connecticut are, and I presume that's true everywhere. For example,
I would think so.
in New Hampshire, Republicans aren't spending any money in Annie Custer's district, but they are in Chris Pappas's district. There's a $1.5 million dumped in the last week trying to win that one for the Republicans. Chris Pappas in New Hampshire won, and almost nothing spent by them in New Hampshire too. So I would guess the same stuff's going on because it's the same group. But Sorowecki says, it's comical how full of lies the anti-Democrat ads in Connecticut are. This centrist Democrat supposedly supported defunding the police. This woman voted for a bill that raised heating costs 78%. That would be John Hayes. This guy voted to send billions of dollars to criminals like the Boston bomber.
That was a great idea.
The Democratic ads are all like, Joe's a good guy who works across the aisle to bring jobs to Connecticut. Actually, that's Joe Courtney at the other side of the state. While the Republican ads are all, Bill's a commie sympathizer who wants to let criminals run rampant and send billions to illegal immigrants.
Yeah, well,
and then there's an anti-Ned Lamont Democratic governor ad featuring a woman whose husband is a cop who was seriously injured when a fleeing suspect smashed him with his car. She says, I blame Ned Lamont. Lamont has to be saying, what? Well, yeah, how is that my fault?
All right.
So we got another week.
I was driving the car.
And, I suppose it's good for the Connecticut economy because, you're paying TV stations for this. So maybe it's worth a few jobs. Who knows?
I guess that's one way of looking at it. Yeah, it's the worst possible moment in the political advertising season when the people who are into this stuff, you sling your worst ads, and even if they're total fabrications, you can't be held to account before Election Day anyway. So
yeah, so the spaghetti part of the campaign, right? You just throw it against the wall and see what sticks.
Right. So, all right.
So that's annoying. So on the international front, let me start with what you brought up in terms of Seoul.
Okay.
And, yeah, it's not a stampede.
Oh.
What happens is, for anybody familiar, for example, there's one of the dogs.
Hello.
I'm not paying enough attention to her.
Okay.
So
we'll talk to her.
You can imagine the French Quarter, if you're familiar with that. Really tiny, narrow streets.
Yes, all right.
Streets of London. And then you put 50,000 people there.
All right.
And tell them to go through the alley. And the people in back are pushing the people in front. So there's no room.
All right.
Can't get in, can't get out. If somebody falls over, it's like dominoes.
Oh.
The whole crowd falls over and can't get up. Then you have people on top of you, and you literally can't breathe.
All right.
That's what happened.
Well, that is
It's not like
nightmare.
people were rushing to get in there. They were in there, they couldn't get out, and then a few people push and shove, and the next thing you know, the whole crowd falls over.
Yeah. I don't know. That's worse. That's
it's horrible, but it's not a
the whole
stampede.
thing. Okay. Well, it's
like everybody was running to get killed.
Stand.
No, that's not what happened.
Everybody
so
was slowly
why was that crowd
falling
control
down on each
allowed
other.
to happen? That's the issue that they're going to be looking at. Terrible tragedy, but it's happened in other circumstances as well.
Oof.
In Brazil, Bolsonaro loses by like 1.5 points.
Yeah.
And Lula's back.
Lula, he was
who's a
president
leftist.
earlier.
Bolsonaro was far from a leftist. Whether or not he'll accept it remains to be seen. There were reports that the Brazilian police, prior to the knowing of who won, were in the Lula favoring states trying to blockade people from getting to the voting areas. So, but maybe that's...
so was Ned Lamont.
Yeah, well, it's probably Ned Lamont's fault. But the thing is... Joe Biden,
I know,
and Macron, the other leaders got together and immediately congratulated Lula, trying to make a wave of, the election's over, and we all accept this, so let's move on kind of vibe, and we'll see whether or not that works. So it was a message to Bolsonaro to back off, and the world recognizes what happened. In Russia. There were strikes on the Ukrainian power supply in Kyiv this morning, leaving the majority of the capital without water and power. They're losing the war, so they're desperately trying anything and everything, including war crimes, which isn't going to help them win the war because they're still getting their head handed to them on the battlefield.
Fentanyl.
In fact, it's probably Ned Lamont's fault. So the latest thing that happened is attacks in Sevastopol on Russian ships And as a response, Russia said, okay, we're getting out of that grain deal. Ukrainian grain goes to feed the third world, so we're not allowing it anymore.
Okay.
The
so
thing
they're
is,
starve other
Turkey's
people.
ignoring them and shipping grain anyway.
Oh. All right.
So whether or not Russia now
guess
wants
go
to
Turkey.
confront Turkey, a NATO member, I would add,
Right.
remains to be seen.
That will be interesting.
So maybe more, again, bluff, 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 bluff. Maybe I get something, spaghetti theory of war. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Tomorrow,
Well,
another
yes.
election, this time
Good. Where?
in Israel.
Every day.
Guess what? Bibi Netanyahu's running again.
Why? What?
And guess what? The polls say he's got 60 seats. You need 61. Does that sound familiar? I think it's happened 4 times in the last 5 years.
Huh.
So you should
Okay.
be used to it.
Right.
Will
well,
the
I'm used to
Arabs
it here.
vote this time? Will anything change? This time, Netanyahu's support is coming mostly from the very ultra-Orthodox parties. So he's going to be even more forced into a ultra-Orthodox coalition should he win. And should he not, then we're right back to where we were before. So that's a really complicated situation.
They should force him to wear the uniform. The
He's
Haredi
73. I
outfits.
think the thing to do is let him run for election, every 6 months and kind of wait him out.
I guess. Well, everything old is new again. Lula is back. So I guess he thought he'd come back too. Ned Lamont is at fault of
Berlusconi's
things.
back. He's too old to run, but he's
Right.
part and parcel of the Italian coalition. Still not clear what's shaping up there. So in the final week's poll says the Times of Israel, conservative paper, the bloc headed by former Prime Minister and Likud leader Benjamin Netanyahu bloc passed the magic 61 seats 6 times in the polls for the best polling week in months and fell short in the other 9. And so nobody knows what's going on. There are public polls, and then there's partisan polls, just like here. The partisan polls show Netanyahu winning, and the public polls show he's just short. So nobody really knows what's going on there.
Okay, well.
In England, it's interesting. I was talking with some conservatives on Twitter this morning, and
Why?
they are absolutely positively convinced Brexit has absolutely nothing to do with any of Britain's problems, and how dare you even bring it up?
That seems unlikely.
It
I
seems
must say,
unlikely. I
people.
mean, for example, there's going to be elections in Northern Ireland now because they can't decide who's really running the government, and the Northern Ireland-Irish Sea border is part and parcel of trying to figure out what to do with Brexit.
Yes. I unraveled that by watching Dairy Girls on Netflix, and I figured the whole situation out now. Comedy set in the 1990s in Northern Ireland. It works. I mean, if you can make Hogan's Heroes, you can make this.
Yeah, well, maybe.
I recommend it. Fun. Everyone should and their accents are terrific.
So
Yes.
let's turn a little bit more to what's going on in this
Real
country.
world. Yes.
The
our
pundit
country,
roundup
yeah.
that I had this morning actually led with the whole Nancy Paul Pelosi thing,
Yes.
which I thought was kind of important.
Just you, though, not the New York Times. They are not.
No,
interested.
apparently not. The New York Times covered it for a day,
Yes.
but then went on to do some really important things.
As long as they were important, probably, baking your own
society
sourdough
weddings
or
and
whatever,
things like that.
right?
Whatever the New York Times audience
Putting
really thinks is
capers in
important.
your chicken salad or some dumb thing.
Right. Who was it? Josh Marshall said, somebody told me about the New Yorker a long time ago, that it's not really a magazine. It's a club that happens to publish a newsletter,
That's an interesting way of looking at it.
right? Because if you're a New Yorker subscriber and aficionado, you're telling us something about yourself and who your associates are.
Yes, I could see that.
And then, by the way, it's got really funny cartoons.
And you get a tote bag, or
Well,
or
the
is
same
that the
thing
other
is
one
true
with
with the
the
New York
tote
Times.
bag? Well, okay, yeah, I could see how that would be a better description of it.
But, there's other things. The Times, of course, did cover it. But Politico, Pelosi's status as GOP campaign ad villain faces new scrutiny after violent home invasion. The speaker has headlined Republican attacks for almost as long as she's led House Democrats, a political truism her party's lamenting after her husband's assault. But we've talked about this for a long time in terms of the role of majority leader and speaker. A lot of times, your job is not only to line up votes for things that you think are important, and by the way, pay attention to the rules so that you know when you can pull some obscure rule nobody ever heard of out of your back pocket when you need it.
You want to know that.
It's also to be the lightning rod, you've taught me that,
Right.
two things so that your members get a get out of jail free card while you take the criticism about something that they would rather you blame the speaker on than blame themselves.
Yes.
Right? And so Democrats have wanted her to be Nancy Pelosi, San Francisco values speaker, so that everybody could yell at her and leave them alone. But that has consequences over the years if it turns out the opposition isn't just writing nasty, cartoons on Reddit, but they're also like hitting people on the head with a hammer.
Yes, I guess it could have gone. This is not our fault. Nor Ned
So,
Lamont's.
they're right. The laser focus on Pelosi, who's, while hardly new phenomena, is drawing new criticism in the wake of the violent assault on her husband early Friday morning. And by the way, the latest I heard is that zip ties were found as well. So it wasn't just where's Nancy. It was like a replay of January 6th. Yes. The assailant, whose online activity was steeped in conspiracy and baseless allegations about the 2020 election, had been specifically searching for the speaker, according to law enforcement officials, calling out where's Nancy.
Yes, a lot of parallels.
Kevin Collins writes, the phrase you're looking for is domestic terrorist made second assassination attempt on the Speaker of the House in less than 2 years. Because, with January 6th, that's in fact what happened. Washington Post,
right?
All of these outlets handling it much better than the New York Times. Paul Pelosi recovering his attack renews focus on toxic politics, renewing concerns about the toxic political atmosphere and prompting calls to beef up security for lawmakers and their family members.
Yeah, there should be.
And that same James Surowiecki shaking his head at the Connecticut ads says, I'm literally shaking my head at Fox's Jesse Waters saying a lot of people get hit with hammers, as in what's the big deal?
Yeah, there was some really strange attempts to change the original, like the first line Fox defense here was, well, there's crime wave all over the country like we've been telling you, and so that's what's happening here. But then, Waters takes it a step further. Everybody's getting hit with hammers. I mean, why should they punish this guy?
Right. Nicholas Grossman from Ars Digital. Where was he radicalized? Rarely had such a clear answer. Tucker Carlson specifically, maybe in part, but it's the ecosystem, not one figure. Did Pelosi's attacker have mental health issues? Maybe, but that means he's more susceptible to influential conspiracy theory pushers, not less.
Yes.
So anybody who says, well, you got to, understand that guy had mental health issues.
Well,
if you remember the movie Network,
yeah,
Howard Beale had mental health issues.
He did,
but that didn't stop the CEO of his broadcast company from co-opting him and turning him into a weapon.
That's true. I mean, really good question. Does Tucker Carlson have mental health issues?
Jonathan Weiler is a political scientist and has written books about authoritarianism. Writes on his Substack, A Rising Tide Sinks All Boats.
That's new. Well, they all have
seeding the atmosphere for more political violence and discerning the relationship between climate change broadly and extreme weather events. One can't prove that every specific hurricane is a consequence of atmospheric changes induced by increased carbon emission. But it's certainly possible to draw a relationship between climate change and the heightened frequency of extreme weather events. And likewise, it can be a fool's errand to try to discern specifically what motivates individual acts of political violence. I don't mean that we can't hypothesize. Remember, it's irresponsible not to speculate.
Right.
I don't mean that we can't hypothesize that this fellow DePape wanted to harm Pelosi for political reasons. I just mean that millions of people share at least some of his views, most notably the myth of the stolen election, without deciding to break into the speaker's home. It still takes a special kind of person to actually go that far. But we can say with greater confidence that GOP elites, including Trump, Tucker Carlson, MTG, Ted Cruz, Jim Jordan, Alex Jones, Ron Johnson, Mike Lindell, and others, see it as in their political and economic interest to poison the political atmosphere as much as possible, seeding a climate in which political violence, like the intended attack on Pelosi and her husband's assault, is ever more common.
Yes.
For example, I still can't get over this little reported incident, and he tweets something that he saw. This is at a Turning Point USA confab in 2021. Somebody in the crowd said to Ted Cruz, considering all we hear about Fauci, Biden, and the treason of the last 11 months, are they going to take applications for the firing squad? Because I'll be number one. And Cruz laughed and nodded approvingly.
Yes, right. Well,
I mean,
we hear those all the
that's so
time.
mild you don't even pay attention anymore. But it's all part and parcel. And this is a year ago. Of oh, you want to kill them? That's a great idea.
Yeah.
I totally approve of you. Let me laugh and just normalize it.
Yeah, although the only sympathy I have with the politicians who aren't saying the things but reacting to things is sometimes I get the feeling that I feel like if I were stuck in the same position, that's
Nervous
sort of
laughter.
like nervous laughter. Ha ha ha! Don't kill me. Or if I just nod and ha ha ha, then you'll let me leave and not be associated with you anymore.
Yeah,
but
except
still,
like a normal person would be Homer Simpson backing into the bushes
right,
and trying to get the hell out of
I
it.
understand the nervous laughter, but yeah, you also, if in order for that to work, you can't also be saying those things from the stage, which Ted Cruz actually has a pretty long track record of doing.
Right. So Jonathan Weiler cites that and says it's hard to imagine what could de-escalate the rising tide of violence normalization since there's no meaningful counterweight in the GOP. Republican officials who did speak out against this stuff risk immediate excommunication. Like Lynn Cheney, for example.
Right, yeah. Don't have to imagine it. It's been done.
Right. So we'll take a look at where the election stands after the break.
All right.
But I think the background of all that, maybe that's the October surprise. That's something nobody's polling in terms of how that registers. And no, it's not going to be a game changer that's going to change everything. But in a close election, everything matters.
Yeah, that's true. So already accusations that the whole thing was staged for just that purpose. I've seen
even
that one
worse.
disseminated. Oh, okay.
When Paul Pelosi in code called the 911 dispatcher who saved his life and said, "My friend is here," well, that just proves it was premeditated. And besides, I heard they said that he was in his underwear and it was all, gay prostitution. None of which is true.
They went that direction.
But they went that direction.
Yes, they did. And I did hear that the one reporter who first, blurted out the story about the thing has since retracted it. But, of course, it's now gospel.
It was one Fox News outlet. That's it.
And he's
But now
corrected
it's gospel
himself.
when you can't put the genie back in the bottle.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Unless you've been killed by thoughts of fentanyl over the last 2 minutes, I need to keep that in mind and make sure we mention it every couple of minutes because it's a huge craze. And also, litter boxes, totally real.
Right.
So,
by the way, Simon Rhodes was absent from his trial because he had COVID, but apparently he's back in the courtroom today. So they can go ahead and try him for seditious conspiracy.
Okay. Oh, what's his name? Rhodes, the Oath Keeper.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Still going.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
That's gonna be a couple of weeks.
All right. Well, congratulations. Enjoy your 15 weeks in the spotlight, apparently.
Right. So, they're covering some good stuff today, according to the Twitter people who are following it. They're covering the parts where Kelly Meggs was in touch about getting to Washington and demanding, not asking, that this be resolved in a peaceful way by bringing everybody to trial who deserves it.
That's
that
so
kind of
peaceful.
stuff.
Right. Okay, sure. Well, we await I don't know how far we are from this case wrapping up and getting a verdict, but so he had COVID in the middle of it, huh?
Yeah.
What a hoax.
So he was out for a few days. But
all right. Well,
I guess there was an agreement that some of the witnesses would be permitted to testify, even though he wasn't there. So it didn't have that much super large effects
All right. Well,
on,
things
how
kept
the trial
rolling,
went.
but he was not around to
Anyway,
gaze at while they testified.
so the big thing that came out today was yet another new New York Times Siena poll.
Oh.
Senate control hinges on neck-and-neck races, Times Siena poll finds.
Well,
So
that's
before
where
we
it
get to
goes.
that, let me just do this one little piece from Bill Scher. Wrote generic congressional ballot averages as of October 30th. A place called Split Ticket has Democrats plus 0.4 on their average. 538 has Republicans plus 0.8 on the generic ballot for theirs. And Real Clear Politics, RCP, has Republicans plus 2.9. Now, there's a whole bunch of discussion about the fact that Real Clear Politics and Republicans in general have been flooding the zone with partisan polls trying to, push Republican numbers up.
Yes, a lot of talk.
And G. Elliott Morris adds, our economist generic ballot average is actually at R plus 0.3 for what it's worth. But we're not pretending that the differences between these methods can reliably capture differences down to the 10th decimal place. So essentially, the generic ballot is a tie and has been a tie the last couple of weeks.
Okay.
And the point is, the thing that's driving all of this discussion about, but Republicans are making gains and Republicans are building a wave is based on Republican partisan polling plus expectations plus where they spend their money. And I don't have it in front of me, but Benji Sarlin made a very astute observation and said a lot of the thing that's driving the narrative here isn't so much the public polls you're seeing. It's the fact that Republican district polls show that it's going to be a brutal year for Democrats.
Okay.
And so that's why everybody in Washington is saying, there's really a red wave building and stuff has shifted Republican. So that's the bad part for Democrats, Benji Sarlin says. And then he adds, but of course the other side of it is these same polls were brutal for Republicans in 2020, and that's not how it turned out. So they were wrong.
Oh, well, I guess. Yeah, I
So
don't know how to
in
look
other
at that
words,
one.
what I'm trying to say is that the reason people are saying that, everything is moving in the direction of Republicans is a combination of Republican partisan polling, which is like 4 out of 5 of the polls that have been published the last couple of weeks,
Yeah.
in addition to narrative and expectations, which is resistant to data.
Yes.
We have our story and we're sticking with it.
Yes.
So, some of it might be
Interesting.
true. What I'm seeing, again, a pretty much tied generic ballot that hasn't changed much. And so we're still down to where we were before. Now we have early voting to look at. And now we have, the latest and because it's the last week, going to be the last set of polls come out. So New York Times today, Senate control hinges on neck-and-neck races, Times Siena poll finds.
Okay.
Arizona, Mark Kelly, 51, Blake Masters, 45, plus 6 Democrats. Pennsylvania, John Fetterman, 49, Oz, 44, plus 6 Democrats. Only one day of that poll was after his debate. Okay. And the article doesn't say debate shifted things toward Oz in terms of vote. The article says things shifted toward Oz in terms of people's perception of how healthy Fetterman was.
Okay.
But there's not a one-to-one correlation
I
between
guess.
that and who I'm voting for.
All right.
So again, incomplete information. Georgia,
Sure.
Raphael Warnock, 49, Herschel Walker, 46, Democrats plus 3. Nevada, Catherine Cortez Masto, 47, Adam Laxalt, 47.
That's
So
necky.
for things shifting towards the Republicans, those are actually pretty good polls for Democrats.
Okay. I mean, yeah, it's not abject disaster. They may in fact be shifting, but
They may.
hopefully, so what?
What the interesting things are, and both the Democrats and Republicans looking at this poll are scratching their head about, is the idea. Robert Blizzard is a Republican pollster. He polls for Public Opinion Strategies. Democrats in 3 of the 4 swing states are going to run double digits ahead of Biden's approval because everybody knows Biden's approval decides these races, except when
guess.
they don't.
Yeah. All right.
Right? Kelly is running at 51. Biden's approval in Arizona, according to this poll, is 36.
That's ahead.
Georgia, Warnock is running at 49. Biden's approval in Georgia is 39. Pennsylvania's closer. Fetterman's 49 and Biden approval's 42. In Nevada, it's tied at 47 and Biden's approval's 38.
Mm-hmm.
So, no, there isn't a one-to-one correlation. But everybody knows the fundamentals are when a president has low approval, this is what X means. Now,
Even
it
if
doesn't
numbers don't say
if
so.
you're running a Senate race and you're a terrible candidate.
Yeah.
And that's why Tim Ryan is still so close in Ohio, because Vance is terrible. And, Fetterman may or may not be the perfect candidate for Pennsylvania. He is if he wins. He's not if he loses.
Yes.
That's the way it works.
Right.
But Oz is a terrible candidate.
Yes.
And that's why, he's not ahead, and you'd expect him to be.
He's a terrible Pennsylvanian.
Nevada's an interesting story, and it's not one that either Republicans or Democrats can feel good about at this point. We have a lot of the early vote in, but not enough of it to really make any conclusions. Mm-hmm. Democrats are doing okay, but basically the write-up is that, and you can find this on John Ralston's early vote blog, and you can find this in the tweets of John Samuelson, who follows this really closely. Democrats are doing just okay, and at this particular point in time, turnout isn't over the roof the way it is in Georgia. The electorate is much older. There's a lot of indies. Yes, Democrats are building a firewall in Clark, as they always do. That's where most of the votes are. And they're actually holding their own and winning a little bit in Washoe County, which is the swing part of the state.
Yeah, all right.
And that has a lot of people in it. And at the same time, they're also holding their own with the Democratic individual House races. However, the firewall isn't as robust as it has been in other years. This is a year where independents might vote for the Republican and not the Democrat.
Don't do that.
And the electorate is tending to be older. So one way to look at it is if the Democrats don't improve things, they're going to be in trouble because there'll be a red wave on Election Day. That always happens with the rolls coming out.
Mm-hmm.
The other way to look at it is, well, the Democrats are holding their own, even with an older electorate, and before the kids show up. And the kids always show up late in Nevada and everywhere else, and there's charts and graphs to prove that. And so if, in fact, they show up like they normally do, or even more, then the Democrats will be in much better shape. And that's why nobody really knows what's going on in terms of who's going to win Nevada. And Nevada is the only state, because of its track record, that you could actually look at the early vote and try to make some sort of conclusion out of it. The other states you really can't, again, because you know who shows up, but you do not know how they voted. You don't know how the independents are voting. And you don't know how much and whether youth vote will, in fact, show up late. And, for example, there were CBS Battleground polls over the weekend, which looked at the battleground states. And let me just read you what they wrote. Republicans today remain in good position to win a majority of seats in the House. However, and what they mean by that is their model gives Republicans 14 seats, not the 40 that you would expect based on fundamentals, but 14. However, voters' current intentions suggest anything from a sizable GOP majority to a bare Democratic one possible. Our latest model indicates a range of possibilities which you can explore using our interactive tool. So what politically does the scenario look like in which Democrats manage to hold the House? We ran our estimates through a turnout model in which younger voters turn out in much higher numbers than our baseline model indicates, bailing Democrats out late in the game. That's exactly what I was talking about in Nevada. This would run counter to what we've seen in recent weeks, but that's because they don't vote early.
Okay.
And it's not impossible, they say. It's more akin to what happened 4 years ago with voters under 45 and people of color voting in droves, since they're heavily Democratic groups matching 2018's record-setting turnout would stem Republican gains, turning House control into a toss-up around 218 seats. Were this scenario to materialize, it would take days or weeks into November for a handful of close races to settle and reveal the new balance of power. So if you're a Republican, you got to feel better about the election than if you're a Democrat, and there's various reasons for that. One is structural in terms of, the party in power generally lose seats in midterm. Some of it is in the DNA of the parties, because Republicans are always confident and Democrats
Yeah.
aren't.
True.
Some of it is the narrative, which is definitely influenced by partisan polling that Republicans
Yes.
throw into the mix on purpose in order to do this. And part of it is a little hopium on the part of Democrats, hoping that when the youth vote tells the Institute of Politics, as they did this week, that they're really interested in voting, even more so than in 2018 and 2020, they mean it. But since they show up late, you can't tell till they show up.
I guess.
So, we'll see. We'll have a better idea by midweek, because at least we'll see in Nevada whether that's happening.
I guess so. And they were making attempts in some of the counties in Nevada to try and, the courts worried that they might be trying to figure out who was actually voting and how they were doing early. So they stopped their now, I guess, blocked hand count in some of the.
Well, they found out it was actually complicated.
Yeah, that was a terrific article. I think we read through it on Friday, just showing all the activists who said, well, there has to be paper ballots and hand counts, and they in a tiny little county decided, well, we'll try it that way, and actually it's extremely difficult and tedious and takes much longer than they thought, and also poses the danger of actually exposing the results unintentionally before people have had a chance to vote on Election Day. Right. Which is absolutely
there's a similar story in the Washington Post about Georgia. I don't know if you saw that.
No, I haven't seen that one.
It's really interesting. It's called Democracy in America by Stephanie McCrumman, and it's called How One Small Town Lawyer Faced Down the Plans of Election Skeptics.
Okay.
And basically, in this rural Georgia county, everybody was really upset about how things work, and they want to get rid of the machines.
Mm-hmm.
And it says, of all the counties in Georgia, this is the one where the activists believe they would succeed. Pickens County, a small, rural, overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly Republican, and under-the-radar place where election disinformation had flourished and people who believed it had easily overtaken the establishment GOP. And what they wanted now was a version of what people like them are going for at the grassroots level all over the country, a way to question the results of a decided election. In their case, they wanted a hand recount of paper ballots cast in the May GOP primary.
Okay.
So what they wanted to do, they wanted to make the sealed paper ballots public record. They wanted a judge to grant the county election board broad powers to conduct elections in whatever manner it deemed necessary.
I don't know about that, but okay. Good.
Right.
It's a nice
request. And so they brought suit. And the Harvard-trained attorney for the county's Republican Party said, you have to do this. This is a slam dunk. Okay. And the Pickens County attorney stood up from the table and said, I'm Phil Landrum for the respondent. And basically, this is like, watching one of those witness for the prosecution or a Clarence Darrow or whatever, one of these dramatic courtroom scenes from the movies. And this local lawyer keeps saying, I understand what you're asking, but we can't do that. Well, why can't? It makes total sense to be able to do that. You can't do that because it's the law. Law says you can't do that. But we want this. It doesn't matter what you want. But we don't think it makes any sense. It doesn't matter what you think. Well, I don't feel like this is really fair. It doesn't matter what you feel. Yeah. This is the law, and the law says you can't. And that guy won.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's and it's a great example of what, for lack of a real term for it, we on the show call "Why don't you justism?" You come to the public forum with your fantastic ideas to cure the problems that you view as being critical, and you just propose, well, why don't we just suspend all previous law and practice and understanding of reality and do it this magical way where we count everything.
At first, this guy was, he's a local guy and, just as conservative as everybody else in town. He said, I'll look into it.
Mm-hmm.
And he looked into it and said, the law says you can't.
Yeah.
So it was like in Michigan, when they didn't, when the board was trying to vote to not certify the election.
Mm-hmm.
And the governor said, you can't do that.
Right.
If you do, it's against the law. And if you do that, we'll dissolve you and we'll just do it ourselves.
Thing in New Mexico. Where
so this article says he lost childhood friends, some of whom lobbied for him to be fired, saying he was against community values. And he said, "Now let me explain to you what being the Pickens County attorney means. My role isn't to represent community values. My role is to tell you what the damn law is."
Yeah. That, you could try and change it, but you haven't done it yet.
Right? Other times he put it a different way. So imagine a room, 40 by 40, no windows, one door. In each corner, put a bowl. This is one bowl, 4 bowls, one in each corner.
Yes.
In the bowl, put 2 parts warm milk and 1 part LSD. And then put in 40 feral cats. Walk out, shut the door, walk back in, and try to get the cats back in the middle.
All right.
That's what you're doing here. You do that, it'll never be this. You can't go back when you do that. And it's against the law. We're not doing it. Yeah. And so, that's how many guys are like that? How many are going to be left? That's really the worry. This is USA Today. Trouble ahead. Most Republicans don't trust midterm election count to be fair. Poll finds. I'm hoping if you're really doubting the election and you're a Republican, stay home.
Yeah, you should do that.
If you don't think it's fair, then don't even bother.
Absolutely. That's the best solution for you.
Anyway, other little tidbits. I mentioned to you that Nevada, the House races seem to be going okay for Democrats as far as the early vote goes. That is to say, what Ralston is looking for is, are you voting ahead of your registration? If you got a 10% lead in registration in that county, is your vote 11% in your favor in the early vote so far? If it is, you got a pretty good chance of winning, even though we don't know who you voted for.
Yeah, except in Nye County, where they kept shouting out who they voted for.
So in New Mexico, the Democrat has the edge in a race for U.S. House seat.
Yes.
And Stephen Claremont looks at it and says, well, if there's a red wave, Republicans will be leading in at least 2 New Mexico House districts, but they're leading in none, including one with the GOP incumbent.
Okay.
So,
that's a thing.
Again, if you're looking for early vote to tell you anything, and you're not Nevada and you're not John Ralston, don't. Because, we don't know who people voted for. We don't know who's still going to show up on Election Day. And we don't know when and if the youth vote will come in. Without knowing those things, you really can't predict anything about the election.
I mean,
what you can say
fundamental.
Is you can count how many people have shown up already and say, oh, this is a large turnout compared to other years or not.
Yeah.
You even have to pick which year. Is it 2020, the election year? Probably not a good comparison. Is it 2018? In Georgia, it's a good comparison because 2018 had a hot gubernatorial race, and so there's something to compare to. Other states, not so much, so it's really hard to know. And the other thing is that you keep changing the rules all the time about how your elections are run, so it's really hard to make a direct comparison from one year to another.
That is true, too. I mean, look, basically what it comes down to is you're saying you want to try to predict the outcome of the vote. Yes? Yes. Have you counted any of the votes? No. Then you really can't do that, can you?
Right. And so, since nobody knows what's going to happen until next week at the earliest, nobody's wrong. So you can continue to be certain about what's going to happen.
Well, in that case, all the voters are on fentanyl in their underwear.
It's Ned Lamont's
a huge
fault.
mess. Yeah, right.
Right, especially the ones in New Mexico.
It's Ned's fault everywhere. Neds are very frequently
You can look at other, signs and omens importance and I Ching and knuckles.
Yard
and
signs.
knuckle bones and entrails. Dante Scala, political science professor, looks at New Hampshire and says more than $1.5 million in independent expenditures in New Hampshire 1, but 0 in New Hampshire 2. We're almost done. Okay. So New Hampshire 1 must be the one that they think is competitive.
Unless they're dumb.
Or they have just a little amount of money and they're just spending it everywhere.
True, or
so
or
all of that could be true at the same time.
Right, or the candidate in this one is a friend of the other ones, whoever's got the bank account. Okay, right. That could be it too.
Now, the last thing I'm going to cover, just because I think it's worth mentioning.
All right.
Okay?
All right.
There was a really bad article, uncharacteristically bad for both ProPublica and Vanity Fair.
Really?
On the lab leak theory, based on a Republican Senate minority report that something's fishy here and maybe lab leak is how we got COVID.
That's how that started? All right. I wondered who'd revived that and why.
And that's why.
Republicans.
And the Vanity Fair piece says,
good answer.
On November 12th, 2019, a dispatch by party branch members at the BSL-4 laboratory appears to reference a biosecurity breach These viruses come without a shadow and leave without a trace. What does that sentence mean? These viruses come without a shadow and leave without a trace.
I don't
what does
know.
It mean?
Is it written in
Well, they
Chinese?
have somebody who's a China expert who used to work for the Rand Corporation, who understands party speak and purports to be able to explain it to us.
That's pretty flimsy.
And he believes he has unearthed secrets that were hiding in plain sight, explaining that this, in party speak in China, which is never said in plain English, what it really means is that they must have had an accident there in November of 2019. And the entire story and the Senate Minority Report is based on that. That
sounds bad.
Well, wait. It gets better.
Oh, that sounds better.
Okay. One Twitter expert, Flo DeBarre, says a meta thread on the Vanity Fair ProPublica article investigating a complex and grave situation in the Wuhan lab. The main argument seems to be based on a mistranslation, along with other facts that they get wrong. But let's go straight to the main point. The whole investigation seems to rely on mistranslations of Chinese texts on biosafety, and as a result, the whole case was built around misinterpretation.
That seems like a unique hazard, translating scientific Chinese.
Right. The funny thing is, people were already discussing the mistranslation of these texts before the article even came out, because it was present in a text that felt odd in the GOP report published the previous day. It's interesting to look, said Stuart Neal, at how they've emphasized sentences to imply suspicion of safety incidents. It's disingenuous when you read the rest of the text and the English in places feels odd, as if it's a Google translation.
Yes.
All right. And Zihua Shen writes, issues with the Senate Minority Report in COVID have two issues. Number one, a bad translation of a sentence and a bad interpretation of events leading up to that. So they go on to make the case that this is standard language that they always use to describe the kind of training they do to reassure people that we know this is a BSL or a 4 safety lab, but we train in this all the time. So you always have to be careful of the virus, and you always have to be ahead of it, that kind of thing. In other words, boilerplate language rather than indicating there was a specific issue in November of 2019.
Yes.
Furthermore, people looking at it today found that, that language isn't really from November. It's actually from the previous August. So they really got that one wrong too.
Either. Okay.
There's nothing about it that's
me.
correct. And you can't make therefore a whole chain of things, yada, yada, yada. A miracle occurs, and then we've proven that it's from the lab.
All you have to do is read between the lines of the Chinese scientific political
in
language.
Chinese and translate it to Yiddish, and then from there go on to run it through the servers that came over on from Alpha Bank, and then you could clearly see, if you hold it up to the light,
with fentanyl,
this piece of toast has the face of the guy who leaked the lab virus out to the rest of the world.
Isn't that right, Ned Lamont? Thank you. Yeah. That's
and
incredible.
You've never disproved it, Ned Lamont, nor have you ever given us any convincing reason why you're not responsible for the lab leak.
Exactly.
Prove to us you haven't done it.
Great. So they fell for that, huh? That's too bad. Well,
so it's really too bad. It's very disappointing for ProPublica, but
yeah, I guess it's going to happen from time to time, unless that was what the Chinese Communist Party wanted. I don't know. I can't read between the. I could see how that would definitely throw things off, right? All depending on
it's
the
not only
shading
that,
of the translation from Chinese in scientific language. Wow.
But it's not just I mistranslated. It's that I got the timing of it. The whole key is that this happened in November of 2019.
I think that's the killer.
And that was the well. What about if it happened like the summer?
You mistranslated the date. Like, that's bad. There's no shading for that. So yeah, that's I think that locks it. If the actual conversation took place, a year or two in advance.
Kang. Who is Dake Kang, you ask?
He's a great translator.
He's a journalist at the AP in Beijing.
Great journalist.
As others have pointed out, there's serious factual issues with this piece, including misleading translations of key quotes. But I want to point out one more issue. The contents of the Wuhan biosafety notice was written in August, not November. That overturns the entire narrative.
It's a long shadow that these things have from August to November.
I just thought people had asked me about it. What do you think about this report from ProPublica? Well, I trust ProPublica, but you know what? This was really bad.
Okay. I think that's an excellent explanation because I bet that would come up. And as a matter of fact, I'm thinking now that it might even be in our question queue and I didn't even notice it. But no, so far, no. I guess everybody figured it out for themselves. They have a lot of Chinese readers in our audience, apparently. But that's an excellent rundown of that issue because it did concern me a little bit. Mostly I didn't read it, but I was mostly puzzled. Like, how did this get back again? I thought we already decided everybody who brought this up was already embarrassed out of ever discussing it again, but apparently not. And now we know why. And it sounds like something that could happen to anybody given that there's Chinese translation involved. That's rough.
Well, the person let's see if we have anything here.
We don't.
We don't have anything handy. We don't. Because I remember Jonathan Chait was writing about things that liberals are too easily dismissing the lab leaks. No, actually, they're not.
It was a very odd phenomenon, to be sure. And there was that streak of contrarian, liberal-leaning writers that wanted to show how open-minded they were.
Yep.
And it really deteriorated from there. All right. Well, that is interesting stuff. I think that clears it up for me.
And it also takes us to the end of the hour.
Yeah, right. That's the most important feature of it. If we didn't make it to the end of the hour, there was always fentanyl. And we just, dropped that on the air, and no one could blame us for that. All right. Well, thank you, Greg. And we will return to this again, unless everyone in the world is killed by fentanyl on Wednesday.
And I think we're done with this one.
Yeah.
And hopefully other stuff comes out. And, we'll see what happens with the election. It's still pretty confusing in terms of where things stand. It does look like the Republicans have an edge in the House, but we don't know the size of it.
Maybe they'll walk
and
off
it does
this
look
edge.
like it's a toss-up Senate. We don't know how that turns out.
Very disturbing. And, of course, now we have to start talking about the mechanics of what can happen in an extremely close election where there's lots of accusations of fraud, perhaps from both sides, and control for the moment remains in Democratic hands, and they try to decide whether or not to accept the certificates of election come January. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Very interesting discussion. By the way, excellent job with the dogs in the satellite office in Connecticut. We were aware that they were there and heard a fun and new and interesting voice briefly on the air, but well behaved, everyone, and really didn't interrupt anything. So let's just add that on top of heaping the praise on top of Greg's report for today. By the way, one thing I wanted to mention, but didn't get to when we were talking about the flood of Republican partisan polls and the aim of releasing all those polls. Another angle on the same subject, and I think a slightly different explanation of the same phenomenon that I had put aside when I saw Will Stansel tweeting this along with his own note here. Very smart observation from Tom Bonnier, who writes, he has a long thread on the issue, but the key tweet in the thread that I started on that Will thought was such a smart observation is Tom says, my general issue with this, all of these partisan polls being released, is that if you are a reporter in a battleground state and you see only polls, or you only see polls for 2 weeks with the GOP, as we like to call them, with the GOP up, even unconsciously, you are going to be looking for narratives that explain why the Dem is losing. And those stories will hurt the Dem candidate. I think that's a real possibility. Like, even if you understand what's going on with all of these partisan polls being released, and even if you understand the reasoning behind it, and therefore consider yourself not susceptible to the manipulation, you're still going to be handed a number of these polls that claim that Republicans are winning, and you're going to be asked to explain them. It is, of course, extremely important to Democrats that they win these races. Yes, these are partisan polls. Of course, they're going to show an advantage or they'll speak to the advantages of the Republican candidate here. But in order to make a story about these polls, other than a story about this phenomenon, which, I mean, you could focus on that and try and write that, but I don't know if your editor will let it go. But yeah, if you're forced to try to explain why these polls show a Republican advantage everywhere, even if you explain the phenomenon, you probably also, as balance, your editors will require, you're explaining why it is that Democrats aren't running away with it or might in fact be losing. And so essentially you're going to rack your brain for what are the reasons why the people of this district might reject this Democratic candidate, and you're going to list them for them and they'll all read it. And yeah, it's a real possibility. The wider thread from Bonnier begins, how does he get to this topic? I was just sort of curious about this a couple hours earlier. He's tweeting about Greg Sargent's recap of all of these of the New York Times Siena polls for the key Senate races that our Greg, not Greg Sargent, the other Greg we haven't captured yet, told us about. And Tom comments, after a flood of GOP outlier polls in all of these races designed to create stories about an impending red wave and digging into why Dems are losing, right, and that was the point he was making earlier. And just by way of example, it forces, or, very nearly forces these journalists to then say, well, what accounts for this? And, they're not going to be comfortable with or allowed by their editors to write, well, maybe it's just Republican pollsters cheating and saying we want 10 polls that show that the Republican candidate is winning, and if our polls show that the Democrat is winning, just change it and say that the Republican is winning. I mean, I don't know if that's happening. If it is happening, they almost certainly wouldn't let a reporter say so unless they had 20 sources that could prove it. So instead, you're handed a poll like that and you say, well, it's a partisan poll, so I shouldn't put too much into it. But on the other hand, you might want to ask questions as a voter. Why would a Democrat be shown as losing in a Republican poll? Is it crime? Is it inflation? Is it fentanyl? What is it exactly that's causing this Democrat to be, to lose control of this race? And just by asking the questions, you're planting the seeds in people's minds that must be the reason and that it must be happening. So as I said, Tom observes, after a flood of GOP outlier polls in these races designed to create stories about an impending red wave and digging into why Dems are losing, is it crime? Is it inflation? New York Times and Siena suggests not much has changed in these races in the past 2 weeks. That was our Greg's point as well. The pattern should be obvious now. Oz couldn't close the gap in Pennsylvania, but after the debate, a GOP poll showed him up 3. That poll had the youth vote at literally half of what it has been in previous elections, but many media outlets reported that Oz had surged into the lead. In Georgia, yet another woman came forward with evidence that Walker paid for an abortion. The response? 5 polls from GOP-associated firms were released showing Walker with a lead. These same 5 pollsters have been quite busy in the past week or so, with polls released from around the country suggesting much better GOP performance than other surveys for the most part. Then a screen grab that Tom includes here, saying Nate Cohn sums it up in his write-up of the polls. That's the screen grab, which reads, the flip side, most of the polling over the last few weeks is coming from partisan outfits, usually Republican or auto dial firms. These polls are cheap enough to flood the zone, and many of them were emboldened by the 2020 election when their final results came close to the election results, even as other pollsters struggled. So that's possible. Of course, I mean, again, there's always the possibility of, well, why don't you just fake some polls and put them out there? I don't know why you guys keep trying to actually poll people and figure things out if it's just a strategic release of slanted results. For what it's worth, Tom continues mentioning Simon Rosenberg, who has been sounding the alarm on this for quite some time, and I think Greg may have even mentioned Simon's discussion of it. Simon writing, so did a little more digging on the R's, flooding the zone with polling and trying to game the polling averages in the closing days. He's got his own thread about that. Tom closes his thread out with the one we started with, the general issue being that reporters start looking for reasons that they can write for why a Democrat might be losing control of their race. Simon's thread, he says it's a short thread. Let's see how short. And Simon's idea of a short thread is not always everyone's idea, but it looks pretty under control. He said he did a little more digging into Republicans flooding the zone with polling and trying to game the polling averages in the closing days. He includes in it his own tweet, I think part of another thread, but this tweet reading, there is a ferocious campaign GOP. He says campaign twice. There's a ferocious GOP campaign right now to flood the zone with their polls, game the averages, declare the election is tipping to them. No question they could win, but the early vote and polling this week do not confirm this trend. Sorry. Then he goes on to say, in this secondary thread, the original thread that we were reading, not the offshoot thread that he's basing it on. Here are the percentages of polls released by GOP allied groups, ranked A, B in 538 of all polls taken in the state in October. I don't even know what that means. And what am I looking at now? Percentages of polls released by GOP allied groups. Arizona, I guess where they're doing their work. Arizona 75%, Georgia 55%, Nevada 60%, Ohio 50%, Pennsylvania 60%, Washington 50%, and in states they think are not competitive, Colorado 20%, North Carolina 29%, Wisconsin 0%. Actually, I'm not clear on what that is about, but obviously meant to illustrate that there's a tremendous difference in the amount of attention that they are giving to these races suddenly with partisan polls being released. They're very clearly targeting certain states and not bothering with others. Does anyone know, he asks, what a WIC is? W-I-C-K, WIC. I have them here as independent. Are they? I guess WIC pollsters? Don't know. Also need to note that there has been one non-GOP allied firm dropping very good polls for R's in these states and nationally. Data for Progress. So how much of a difference could this GOP manipulation of the averages be having? There is a 3.3 point difference. That's a lot of points. 3.3 points difference between the generic on Real Clear and one without any partisan polling. The media has to wake up here and stop getting played. These encouraging Senate polls confirm that the red wave narrative was BS again. Or as Greg would have it,
that's bullshit.
Exactly. It's a close, competitive election, and the Senate is leaning Dem. And look, this whole wraps up on itself and implodes by Simon Rosenberg quoting Tom Bonnier in the end of this, who writes, after a flood of GOP outlier polls in all of these races designed to create stories about impending red wave and digging into why Dems are losing, right back to the start of this thing. The New York Times Siena suggests not as much has changed. So, on the one hand, it's all sort of, it all confirmed, they all confirm one another. On the second hand, on the other hand, it's, I guess you could look at it as a bit of log rolling. I'll quote you, you quote me, and we'll go around in circles, and then it'll be a circle of experts all saying the same thing. And sometimes that can grow a little bit suspect. Now, as I was reading, I got a couple other messages here from Greg. Let's see how they bear on things. He sends me the notes. It's too close an association with Ned Lamont. That's why the GOP is surging. Okay, that could be explaining it. Is it inflation? Is it crime? Is it too close an association with Ned Lamont? Easily explained. Okay, so lots happening. What other things can I share with you? I opened up, I think I may have gotten a similar or perhaps slightly different report about the Georgia situation. I went searching for the article that he mentioned, and I think I came up with, I don't know whether they changed the headline in the version that he had versus the version I have. I'm not certain if I have the same article. But on the other hand, how many articles about this situation could there really be by Stephanie McCrumman at the Washington Post? It's certainly the same story. Now the title I'm reading, How One Small Town Lawyer Faced Down the Plans of Election Skeptics. And I think that was the title that he mentioned, right? So I think I've got it. But then he was reading it, and he wasn't reading from the very beginning, so I couldn't match, and I started scrolling around looking for where is he reading from, and it looks like most of the information is the same. But I wanted to I'll keep that one, and I'll throw that out there along with, I mentioned that in Nevada, where Nye County was trying to do its hand count, we discussed it on Friday, but I guess, I don't know whether it was during the show or after the show, that the courts actually ruled on this thing. And I think we mentioned in the story we were reading about how, the difficulties they were having, but also the difficulty. You remember the ACLU in the state was suing to stop this early pre-election day count of early voting because it ran the risk of accidentally or intentionally releasing actual results before election day, so that before many people have had a chance to vote, you didn't really want to have a count out there and available, whether on purpose or by accident. And that the process that Nye County had come up with in order to count these votes was that essentially they would have, they wanted to have a hand count of the paper ballots, and they set it up this way. 2 people would look at the ballot and decide, I guess, to see, do they agree which candidate was voted for on question 1. And I don't know how many times they go through the ballot, or whether they pick up a ballot and read the answers, the votes for every one of the questions on the ballot. That was just one of the complications. But at any rate, you shout it out, and then there's a team of 3 people who are tallying by hand the votes as they're read out. So it's a slow process, a tedious process, and by the way, one that is not particularly accurate, and that apparently the data shows are routinely less accurate than machine counts, but they don't trust machines, so they're going to do this. So 2 people will look at a ballot and say, this is a vote for Jones, and they shout that out, and then the 3 people in the normal world, when you conceive of this thing, you figure this is foolproof. They say the vote is for Jones, and then the 3 people will mark down on their ballot. They presumably have a column for Jones and a column for Smith, and I don't know, maybe a column for others. I don't know. And then they make a little tick mark underneath the right place, and then, I don't know whether they're going to do it the same way and make the little 4 tick marks and then the slash to make 5s the way they did in the ancient world, or what. But lots of people do their tallies that way. And then it's a question of, they all will have written down the same number, obviously, because it's a fact how many times the name Jones was called out and how many times the name Smith was called out. And yet, the reason they have 3 people doing it is that they know that any one of them could make a mistake, either in missing a name, or accidentally making a tick mark in the wrong column, or miscounting the number of tick marks that they actually made, or prematurely ticking off a 5th vote when one hasn't been called, because it's muscle memory when they draw the 4th tick and then they just make the slash. Whatever it is, the reason they have 3 is that any one of those errors could happen. Of course, with only 3 people, it could happen that 2 people make such a mistake, or they make different kinds of mistakes. And what they were ending up finding was that it was taking them 2 hours to count. What was it? It was either 25 or 50 ballots that took them 2 hours to get through. I think they were assigned, the groups were assigned to read 50 ballots, and that they were frustrated that they had only gotten through half of their 50 ballots 2 hours into their count. And they realized this thing wasn't going to work, but also that the ACLU was saying, well, you can't go around shouting out how many votes there were for these people and then shouting the answer down the hall. Now, they tried to have a precaution for this by breaking them up into different rooms so that the 5 people in any one room, though they would have some inkling of what the results were, they would only know about the 50 ballots that they had seen and would not have heard how things are going with the 50 ballots in the next room, presumably. But maybe the sound carries, you never know. But even if it doesn't, the ACLU would likely be arguing, well, that's 50 votes too many that you know about as it is. And we don't know who these volunteers really are. And they're sort of loosely organized and loosely sworn in. And maybe they're, a bunch of idiots. Maybe they're a bunch of partisans. In the picture, they showed up for their swearing in Black Rifle Coffee Company t-shirts. So who knows what that means? We don't know. At any rate, it seems they prevailed in court. And let's see, whose report of this should we read? The first up on the list from Google is the LA Times, but I'm not paying them the money that they need in order to be able to access their articles. They're not my local paper. We do seem to read their pieces fairly often, but I don't know. At any rate, we're tightly shepherding the funding here at KITM headquarters. But let's see, the Nevada Independent has got a report on it, and that sounds like it's hometown work. So let's go take a look, even though they may or may not be independent. By the way, in reading about some of this stuff, I think on Friday it wasn't entirely clear, but I think there was enough information there to suss it out. But I think some of the reports that I've read since then make it clear that the acting clerk, I think it's an acting clerk in Nye County, who, presented as fairly reasonable in the story we read on Friday, in that, he recognizes the limitations. He's trying to design a system that's more or less foolproof, or that at least has multiple checks in it so that they don't get the thing wrong. But he is, in fact, essentially an election denier, in that he just doesn't trust the machines. He's coming from a place of election denialism, not trusting that the machines will do an accurate count, and he's expecting that a hand count will do better than a machine count, which is counter to all the science and all the data. But I think somebody in one of the write-ups sort of explicitly mentioned, he's actually comes from that camp, and you should know that about him. So what am I reading here? The Nevada Independent, which now it occurs to me, I don't know how independent that is. Is that an independent? It's not John Ralston on the story. It's Sean Golanka and Riley Snyder. Let's see what they have to say anyway. Secretary of State orders Nye County to halt hand counting of ballots. Secretary of State did it, okay, not the courts. So we don't have a court ruling, I guess, yet, unless it was the court that directed the Secretary of State here. Let's see what they have to say. Secretary of State Barbara Sagavsky, remember we had trouble with that name on Friday, told Nye County's top elections administrator to cease hand counting ballots immediately on Thursday evening. So I guess this was already news by the time we read on Friday, and I'm not certain that we had that. But we knew of her objection anyway, finding that the county's current process of counting ballots violated Nevada Supreme Court orders and state law. I think, now I feel like we did hear that, but they were counting anyway because they didn't believe that the Secretary of State should be able to stop them from that, even though, well, duh, I mean, why not? Anyway, Sagavsky's letter came less than 2 days after the start of Nye County's unprecedented hand count process, which involved multiple teams of 5 people splitting into separate rooms, to count batches of 50 ballots by hand. I think we remembered it correctly, including reading results from each ballot aloud for talliers to mark down. In a statement released Friday morning, a Nye County spokesman said the county will stop counting ballots by hand, but will, quote, resume as soon as our plan is in compliance with the court's order and approved by the Secretary of State. I mean, that's wishful thinking, maybe. It may never be. On Thursday afternoon, the Supreme Court clarified a previous order stating that the ability of observers to hear the read aloud selections on ballots violates state law, which prohibits the release of voting results from mail ballots prior to the close of polls on Election Day. By the way, so, okay, that seems fairly clear, right? And although I could see where you might say, it doesn't really release the results. I mean, again, 5 people know the results of 50 ballots. And that's really not very much. Now, they could get together, they could share information, and it's kind of dangerous. You kind of have to trust or have people sworn in such that if they do get together in an attempt to release wider data sets, then you can prosecute them for it. But, the damage may already have been done. You can prosecute them, but it doesn't help you fix the outcome of the election. There's that problem. But, I could see there being some leeway in saying it doesn't really jeopardize the election, but the law is the law, and you're not supposed to change the procedure, right? And what's interesting to me is who would be arguing at this point for saying, oh, come on, it's not really releasing the results, and who would be arguing, look, the rules are the rules and you got to stick to them. And the answer, I think, is the opposite of the sides that were arguing this about the 2020 election. Right? The team that's now saying, come on, it's not really so bad. And, what are you so worried about? We're just getting a jump on things so that we can report the results earlier and people will trust them more readily because that's the way they're used to seeing them reported, et cetera, et cetera. The people who are saying that are the people who were saying in post 2020 that the whole election had to be thrown out because these drop boxes weren't authorized by the independent state legislatures. The legislatures handed off authority to the boards of election in these states, and they didn't legislatively approve of the extra drop boxes. And the people who are now saying the rules are the rules, you can't read the results out loud, even in groups of 5 and just batches of 50, you got to follow procedures, are the ones saying, come on, everybody knows that COVID-19 meant we couldn't have regular voting procedure. We had to have drop boxes, and they're secured, and there's really not much of a risk anyway. So come on, why don't you just allow it? So interesting how the roles switched there. And that will play, of course, no part whatsoever and will be considered by no one in the discussion of the independent state legislature theory when they argue it before the Supreme Court. I don't think they've done that yet, and they're getting set to do it. So I guess there's still an opportunity to do it. But I'm betting no one will make that observation. But we have. So that's important. Maybe Sonia Sotomayor will make that observation from the bench. Or, Justice Jackson could bring that up. She's actually been quite active and vocal, as I understand it, already in the court and might feel perfectly comfortable doing this. Well, wouldn't that be fun? I don't know if everybody's read this story, though. So where were we? On Thursday afternoon, the Supreme Court in Nevada clarified their previous order, said reading these things aloud violates state law. The court further ordered that hand count observers may not be positioned so as to become privy to the ballot selections and room tallies. In other words, there really needs to be more protection against people being able to piece together any portion of the balloting results. The court further ordered that the hand count observers, we did do that one, through the first 2 days of the hand count, which began on Wednesday, observers were able to overhear results being read aloud in the tally rooms. So I guess there's that. Observers could hear multiple rooms worth of results. That, according to the Associated Press reporting on it, in two groups observed by the Associated Press, the teams spent about 3 hours each counting 50 ballots. Nye County is home to more than 30,000 registered voters, significantly more than the vast majority of U.S. jurisdictions where hand counting is used to determine election results. I think it was, in fact, the AP report that we read on Friday. Sigavsky's letter, which was first reported by the Associated Press, also indicated that an alternative hand count process could potentially occur, but only after the county and Secretary of State determine one that does not violate the court's orders. No alternative hand counting process may proceed until the Secretary of State and Nye County can determine whether there are any feasible specifics on the hand counting process and observer positioning that do not violate the Supreme Court's mandate, Sigavsky wrote. The state Supreme Court ruled on Friday that portions of the county's hand counting plan, including a plan to live stream the counting, we definitely talked about that, would violate state law prohibiting release of election results before polls close on Election Day. And I think that seems pretty obvious and intuitive. Like, you can't live stream people shouting out the results even of one room, because, you know, the people watching the live stream, you don't have any control over them. You don't have them sworn as officers for the elections department or anything like that. They're just out there writing down the answers and then probably adding them up wrong. So where were we with this? The ruling there. The ACLU of Nevada, which had filed a lawsuit to stop portions of the plan to hand count ballots, praised the court's decision, noting that it bodes well for future similar attempts. Well, the ACLU people there should get in touch with the ACLU people nationally so that the people briefing the court on the independent state legislature theory hearings will know this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see, by the way, it's the Moore versus Harper is the case wherein the Supreme Court will be considering the so-called independent state legislature theory. And I'm trying to, argument, I guess, is scheduled for December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day. How appropriate. So I guess there's still plenty of time to do that and to make people aware. I don't know whether it weighs equally to the to the disfavor of both sides when both sides have switched positions or not. But I guess if you are going to float a new theory like this that could have, it won't matter to the 6 conservative justices of the Supreme Court, and that's ultimately the problem. But to the extent that any of them are open to actual legal argument about this thing, I guess if you're going to change the nature of elections and something so important with a new theory, the theory can't be something that people abandon on a whim, where if the results change for what your side wants, you can't be totally gimmitarian about it. Of course they will be, but I mean, you're not supposed to be. And so in a court that really works, I would think that if you could illustrate that the side that is insisting that there's a whole, hidden theory interwoven in the language of the Constitution as set out by the founders, that it gives you the results you wanted for the 2020 election, but ends up giving you the results you want to avoid in the 2022 election, and you therefore drop the theory entirely so that you can win in 2022, that should be pretty good indication that, you probably haven't actually divined a hidden codex of theories from the original text of the Constitution here. You're just involving yourself, you're just playing the gimmitarian game and saying, I need to win, even in opposite sets of conditions. So is there a rule that will work for me that will get me a win in 2020 and a win in 2022, where in 2020 I need to strictly adhere to the rules, and by 2022 I need to be able to selectively throw out the rules and dismiss the cases by people who are suing based on the theory I just used to get to the Supreme Court? Is there some way I could prevent them from using my theory? That might be an indication that your theory is crap. I'm just saying. So maybe we'll consider that and see if we can't weave a better thing. And we have until December 7th to do that. So that's good news. All right. Let's see. Other things I wanted to share with you. Oh, I didn't mean to necessarily do this one, but some interesting suggestions from Pocket on some esoteric reading that we might be doing. But never mind, we'll leave that aside, although one of them is Halloween related. I don't know. I think I opened it up just because I said, I will read it. The History of Halloween, one of their suggestions. How an ancient Celtic, or do people say Celtic or Celtic? I guess maybe it makes a difference where you're from. Anyway, ancient Celtic harvest festival, how it became the spooky season. It's going to be explained. And do we even want to get into it? I don't know. Seems like something that you might want to spend some time on later, but probably off the air. But because it's Halloween, I'll tell you that it's out there. Share it with you, and you can share with me your pronunciation of Celtic, and whether or not you believe this is the real explanation for Halloween, and whether or not people in South Korea have a cause of action against us or anyone, or the Celts, whoever. Maybe they can recover from their Halloween disaster. All right, let's see. Other things that probably more related to things we're more closely interested in. I will note this from the weekend's news from the Elon Musk takeover of Twitter. I guess it's complete, and he's actually bought the thing, and it doesn't make any sense. And I notice a lot of people are preparing for their departure from Twitter. I would consider a departure from Twitter, except I've never planned anything that I've done on Twitter, and so I don't plan to plan this either. I'd rather just stay. We all should just stay where we are, but it could become an issue where we can't be involved in further enriching Elon Musk, as inconvenient as it is. And a lot of people are planning exits what they want is to coordinate a mass exodus to one other social media platform so that we can all keep talking to each other without interruption. But there is some dispute about which one that platform should be. And I've seen a couple of places hold themselves out as the preferred landing place for liberal-leaning Twitter, but some of them have problems of their own, or are possibly pretty scammy, or whatever, or not particularly secure with their data. So it's unsettled at this point. And the Elon Musk takeover of Twitter, I think, is going to be a slow evolving thing, and to finally get to the disaster that it's predicted eventually to be. But I did see some interesting things about the changes there over the weekend. First of all, he swooped in and got rid of some top executives, which I guess was to be expected, and it's to be expected that would happen rather quickly. But the thing that really grabbed my notice was that he's allegedly planning a large number of layoffs at the company, which would also be more or less in keeping with general, corporate takeover strategy. That's generally something that follows a takeover like this. Somebody who puts a tremendous amount of money into acquiring a new asset, and their first thought is, well, how quickly can I make my money back so that I can start earning from this investment? And, the accountants and consultants will tell you most frequently the fastest way to that is, of course, cut your payroll. And they all think that they're business geniuses that can do this stuff and keep the place running with fewer personnel, and that they're so smart. The old management at Twitter could never have figured out that they should have, trimmed payroll in order to pocket more of the profits. That's pretty much on top of mind for every executive of every company everywhere, whether it's being taken over or not. They're always looking to minimize payroll because the amount of money paid to payroll. The problem with payroll is that money goes to other people. And as we've explained 100 times, and it's always been explained to me here at home, that payroll is a cost center, and you want to minimize those cost centers. What's costing you money? What's taking cash out of your hands? Top on the list, payroll. So we always emphasize it here as a political matter because We are still caught in the web of the 1980s, woven for us by Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, Milton Friedman, and others, that rich people are job creators because they love investing their money in companies that grow and will create more jobs. It's just that the problem with that is that, of course, the chief aim of the company is to grow as much as possible with as few jobs as possible, hire as few people as possible, even though sometimes they can't help it. We can only, economics of expansion require that we hire more help, but do they hire more than they need? Never. Or if they do, if they find out they accidentally have done that, they immediately look to cut back on that. The thing they're looking to do is grow the company so that it can pay them the most money. And how can it pay you the most money if some of it is unnecessarily going to someone else? That's the issue. So they're not job creators. They're job minimizers. That's their chief aim. They will accidentally create jobs, or it's a byproduct of their extraction activity. They need to create more wealth for me to extract, and the people who have to do that should be you, not me, because I'm not going to report to work and create more value. I need somebody else to do that because I'm on my yacht. Anyway, so it should have been no surprise that Musk was going to make cuts. What was interesting is, what are the level of cuts going to be? Now, at Twitter, they thought, if we want to keep the place operating relatively smoothly, and we want to at least appear to be moderating content to some extent so that the place isn't overrun by Nazis and bots and Nazi bots, it's going to take a fairly large workforce. Now, of course, if you are interested in making your money back when you buy a new company, you're going to fire some people. So there's definitely going to be layoffs. If you are interested in taking over the company because you think that they're wasting their time by moderating content, then you can be pretty sure there's going to be much larger numbers of layoffs. Because why would you employ people to moderate content if you don't believe in moderating content and you would like to have the money that you're using to pay them be used to pay you instead? So much larger layoffs were to be expected. Elon Musk, of course, because this is what you do as a CEO, for various reasons, denies that those layoffs are going to take place, even as he's laying those people off. The other interesting angle on this is that I saw claimed early in the weekend that they were scrambling to get these layoffs done over the weekend, which is, if you're going to fire people, I guess if you're the owner of the company, it's your prerogative. You can fire them whenever you want. Typically, you fire them when you are open for business so that your managers can handle the firing. But can you fire them over the weekend while they're at home? Sure. Why not? Why would you? Why not leave it for the managers to handle on Monday? You can, because today is Monday, October 31st, but they have to get the job done quickly because, as it turns out, on November 1st, a large number of Twitter employees apparently will vest in shares in the company that they were offered as part of their compensation package way back when. I don't know how long it took them to earn it. I don't know how long it took them to vest in it, whatever. But apparently on November 1st, if you fire them then, yeah, you can stop paying them, but you have to issue them a whole bunch of shares in the company. And that means Elon owns less of it or controls less of it and makes less money from it, et cetera, et cetera. So a great idea for him if he's A, looking to trim the payroll, and B, looking to steal lots of money, and C, looking to make sure that there's lots more money around for him to steal later, fire them before November 1st. That means somebody's going to have to work this weekend on firing the people who think they're coming to work on Monday. Anyway, he denies all of that anyway, so it doesn't matter. I think the New York Times piece that I put aside had the first mention of these layoffs and the link to the stock shares, the vesting for these employees. And then the Washington Post piece that I have on it includes, and may, the New York Times piece may also have been updated to include the denial of all of this. So we'll see whether or not people start exiting the place with boxes, or maybe they're all remote workers and they just walk around their house with boxes and get sad. We don't know. But eventually, I guess the truth comes out. And my money, to the extent that I have any, and if you would like me to have more, by all means, patreon.com/KagroX, so that I can put more money on the question of whether or not these layoffs are actually going to take place. I would assume, all indications are that he makes out like even more of a bandit if he, in fact, implements these layoffs. Let me read the Washington Post one, because I think it's the later report of the two. So the bets will be hedged a little bit. Musk's inner circle worked through the weekend to cement Twitter layoff plans. I think they're going with it. The first round of layoffs, led by his lawyer, Alex Spiro, will target 25% of the workforce, although I'm pretty sure I saw larger numbers mentioned in the body of the text earlier. Members of billionaire Elon Musk's inner circle huddled with Twitter's remaining senior executives throughout the weekend, conducting detailed discussions regarding the site's approach to content moderation, as well as to plans to lay off 25% of the workforce to start. Alex Spiro, a well-known celebrity lawyer, is he? Okay. Who has represented Musk for several years, led those conversations. Really, I mean, just it seems like the worst collection of, rich a-holes in the world here got together with him over the weekend to do their a-hole business. Spiro is taking an active role in managing several teams at Twitter, including legal, government relations, policy, and marketing, according to 4 people familiar with discussions who spoke on condition of anonymity to describe them, as well as tweets from some of the people involved. So he's like the Mick Mulvaney, I guess, of the Elon Musk administration. He has 18 jobs going at once. Longtime Musk associates David Sachs and Jason Calacanis, maybe? Calacanis, appeared in a company directory over the weekend, according to photos obtained by the Washington Post. Both had official company emails, and their titles were Staff Software Engineer. I don't think that's really what they're doing, but that's the title they gave him. Musk's title in the directory was CEO, although that position has not been publicly announced. He refers to himself, because he's such a card, as Chief Twit. Meanwhile, the team was deciding on what is expected to be a first round of layoffs, which will target roughly a quarter of the staff, totaling more than 7,000, according to one of the people. Layoffs will touch almost all departments and are expected to be specifically impact sales, product, engineering, legal, and trust and safety in the coming days. I don't know what else there is going on at Twitter, but that sounds like it kind of maybe all divisions. I don't know how many they have. I'm sure there's ones that weren't mentioned. After engineers, some of Twitter's highest paid employees work in sales, where several earn more than $300,000, according to documents viewed by the Post. So yes, multi-billionaire Elon Musk, who paid $44 billion to acquire the company, wants to get it back $300,000 at a time. Twitter, Musk, Spiro, Sachs, and Calacanis did not respond to requests for comment. Okay. The billionaire Tesla owner bought Twitter for $44 billion last week after several strenuous months of negotiations and legal wrangling. Musk first made a bid for the company in the spring, then tried to back out months later. Twitter sued to force him to complete the deal, and eventually the entrepreneur acquiesced and offered to buy the company for his original offer price, which I think surprised a lot of people because they thought he'd come in with a lower one. That was the point of his delay, but I guess not. Musk has turned to several longtime allies as he begins his overhaul of Twitter. Sachs, a conservative firebrand and donor, hooray, has worked with Musk from their days running PayPal together 2 decades ago. Sachs has posted strong ideas about content moderation online and has criticized censorship from big tech, but he now is big tech. Calacanis is also a longtime Musk friend who texted him frequently to offer advice on the deal, including about job cuts. Court records showed. I mean, I tweeted him a lot about it, and he didn't ask me, though. Calacanis tweeted Saturday that Saturday was day 0, alongside a photo of a Twitter coffee mug, adding that he had discussed safety issues along with bots and trolls with Yoel Roth, a Twitter executive responsible for content moderation policy. Roth then posted details about those policies. On Sunday, Musk posted apparent internal messages from Roth about Twitter metrics. This is where it gets a little interesting, arguing they show Twitter's board and lawyers, quote, deliberately hid, ellipsis, evidence from the court. Which court? What evidence? I don't know. Maybe about his purchase. That's what would immediately come to mind. The tweet showed Musk using his newly gained access to internal information to potentially settle scores, which is a little petty, but also maybe to be expected and a little dangerous. But you have to figure that that's going to be the case. There are internal memos that might have changed the outcome of whatever litigation was going on between Twitter and Musk, or Twitter and anybody for that matter, that Musk now has for $44 billion purchased ownership of. And now he gets those memos and can, I guess, I don't know what he'll do with them, but to the extent that they prove his claims that Twitter was somehow lying or cheating in the court proceedings, we'll see some of those things come to light, I guess. An embedded tweet here between, or a tweet from Jason Calacanis talking about the fact that he met with Yoel Roth from Twitter Safety today and revealing almost nothing, but okay, they met. The new leadership team is asking questions about every aspect of the business, as you could expect they might be, including details of content moderation, spam, and the risks of upcoming elections, the people said. Another Musk associate who tweeted about his involvement, Sriram Krishnan, a partner focusing on cryptocurrency, sounds great, at the venture capital firm Anderson Horowitz, also tweeted he was helping out with the deal. The firm invested $400 million. So again, sounds like all the kind of people you really would want to hang out and be close with. The partner focusing on cryptocurrency at a VC firm. All right. Less than 3 days into Musk's ownership, Twitter employees remained in the dark about any new plans for the company as of Sunday evening, according to numerous employees contacted by the Post, who spoke on condition of anonymity to protect their jobs. I have news for you. There's no protecting your jobs. The company has yet to release a formal announcement of the acquisition. The communications department has gone silent. Rumors have swirled about layoffs, with some notices going out quietly. Layoffs are expected to begin ahead of November 1st, when Twitter employees are slated to receive additional compensation related to stock grants. On Sunday, Musk tweeted that reporting about impending layoffs at Twitter next week was, quote, false. My guess is that it is in fact, quote, true, but we'll see. Earlier this year, Musk told prospective partners in the deal that he planned to cut nearly 75% of Twitter's total workforce, which would leave the company with about 2,000 employees, according to interviews and documents obtained by the Post. Musk last week told employees when he visited Twitter's headquarters that he didn't plan to cut 3/4 of the workforce. Which, like with Donald Trump, you would now say, well, he plans to cut 3/4 of the workforce. Anyway, another person familiar with the deal who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss sensitive matters last week said the total number of layoffs will be closer to 50%. Also not great for them, but there you have it. Already, Musk has fired 4 senior executives, sent Tesla engineers to evaluate Twitter's software code, which may or may not make sense, and has tweeted that he plans to form a content moderation council of experts. Ooh, I'll take it. I'm throwing you all off Twitter. Meanwhile, illustrating the difficulties of his new task, Musk tweeted out content from a site that is known to publish misinformation this weekend. Yes, this was another interesting angle on the story from the weekend. On Saturday, just to tie this together with other stories we discussed earlier today, on Saturday, Hillary Clinton, the former First Lady and the 2016 Democratic presidential nominee, is everyone familiar? Yes, posted a tweet criticizing the GOP for spreading hate and deranged conspiracy theories that she said had emboldened the man who attacked House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul, inside the couple's home in San Francisco early Friday. All right, so she's basically saying, Republicans are, really turning up the heat. Remember when Donald Trump was saying, anything I can do to turn down the heat, let me know. And then he decided instead to turn up the heat. And now there's this attack. And Musk seeing Hillary Clinton, a famous person who might even be more famous than he is, tweeting about this thing, decides he's got to get in on the action. He's the $44 billion Twitter reply guy now. He bought Twitter to become reply guy in chief. And then he did indeed reply. Musk wrote in a reply to Clinton's tweet that, quote, there is a tiny possibility there might be more to this story than meets the eye, sharing a link to an article in the Santa Monica Observer, a site described by fact checkers as a low credibility source favoring the extreme right. The article alleges, without evidence, that Paul Pelosi was drunk and in a fight with a male prostitute, referencing a conspiracy theory that had previously been spread on the right. They didn't wait very long to spread that. Other right-wing influencers who Musk has interacted with online also amplified the conspiratorial narrative. The actions by Musk, who has since removed the tweet, interestingly enough, show that Twitter has a complicated path ahead, particularly in navigating Musk's public actions and squaring that with what he says privately. That is the end of the article, and boy, does that little one-sentence thing at the end carry a lot of weight with it. Does a lot of work. Twitter has a lot of work ahead of it, a complicated path ahead as they figure this out. Of course, the other tidbit I would throw in here just to sort of wrap up on the Twitter angle on this, and I don't know, I guess I didn't put this away anywhere, but I think I retweeted something over the weekend. But apparently one of the other chief investors, along with the very likely, I don't know the guy, but I'm just going to guess. I'm going to judge a book by its cover. Very probably a-hole guy, because he's the cryptocurrency partner at a VC firm. Anyway, the VC firm that invested $400 million in this purchase. I mean, that's a smallish part. It's a lot of money. A smallish part in a $44 billion purchase, but apparently also putting up a considerable amount of money in this deal is one of the sovereign, or maybe the sovereign wealth fund of the Sauds, the family that owns Saudish Arabia. They beat up more Rashidi family people than vice versa. So instead of becoming Rashidi Arabia way back when, it became Saudi Arabia. The Saud family and their sovereign wealth fund has invested in this as well and are now also part owners of Twitter. And of course, they already have a track record of using Twitter and other social media for political purposes, and they crack down on people all the time. And I think they were just in the news for cracking down on and arresting a Saudi citizen when he arrived back in Saudish Arabia for tweets, anti-government, anti-administration, whatever, however you would refer, anti-regime tweets that he made while he was abroad. And then he returned to Saudish Arabia and they arrested him for it. And of course, they are a big partner now with Elon Musk, who just bought Twitter because he's all about free speech and ending content moderation. But his partners in the deal are arresting people for the tweets that they make, and you're not really going to be able to resolve those two philosophies, but it doesn't matter because there's no real philosophy behind Elon Musk. He just wants what he wants. And I guess if you can put together a $44 billion deal and you're sitting on a pile of money, you get what you want. So anyway, there's a lot of work to do to resolve these things, unless, of course, you're happy living as a gimme-tarian, which he is, and there will be no resolution, and we'll all be left hanging and wondering whether or not, I don't know, we won't be arrested, I presume, for what we tweet. We just may not be allowed to continue doing it at Elon Musk's discretion, which is in danger with concentrating that much wealth in a few people's hands. All right, that's it. That's the signal that we're about ready to wrap things up and hand the microphone over for the day. Is there anything extremely important that I had in pocket that absolutely, positively must at least be mentioned before we close it out? No, I don't think so. But I probably missed your fun story, whoever you are, along the way. And in fact, I definitely did. So there's something that we'll return to. We'll put on the record here, for perhaps later examination. Patrick Snyder has tweeted us a provocative 2-tweet thread. I assume he meant thread, but it looks like it's a maybe that emoji is next to a barrel of oil or something like that. A provocative two-tweet barrel. I don't think that's exactly what you meant, but it was from Andrew Weissman, who points out in this short thread here that the grand jury subpoena, I know I'm getting into something else here, the grand jury subpoena that the government served in May of 2022 in the Trump documents case called for the production of documents bearing classified markings wherever they are located. I don't think I knew this about this. That is to say, in other words, it was not limited to Mar-a-Lago, even though Trump only produced documents from Mar-a-Lago. So if there are documents elsewhere, they should have been produced. And the intentional failure to obey a grand jury subpoena by failing to produce documents at Mar-a-Lago or elsewhere is itself a crime, according to 18 U.S. Code Section 402. That is a short thread. It is provocative. And it's the first mention I've seen that the warrant, or that not the warrant, but that the grand jury subpoena was that wide-ranging. And I confused it with the warrant, which was very particular, and I guess probably was limited only to Mar-a-Lago, but I guess it hints that there could be further searches or further warrants necessary if they really can get evidence that points to documents being stored elsewhere. So anyway, something to keep in mind as we hand the microphone over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy next.
From netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Voting ongoing across the country, of course. President Biden apparently cast his midterm ballot on Saturday, according to Justice's right up here. And striking warehouse workers in the Pacific Northwest are back to work. And the black church tradition of souls to the polls survives Georgia's voting changes. Hallelujah, you might say.